Welcome to the Crosscheck, business aviation squawk sheet that uncovers the stories, challenges, and careers shaping the industry today. I'm your host, Rob Hoffman.
And I'm Ian Lum.
Joining us today is Jennifer Pickerel, president of Aviation Personnel International, the longest-running recruiting firm dedicated exclusively to business aviation. With a deep passion for leadership, development, and workforce strategy, Jennifer has spent years helping flight departments and aviation companies attract, retain, and develop top talent. She's a recognized industry expert on hiring trends and the evolving challenges of workforce management in business aviation. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you both.
Hey, real quick, could you just give us a background on API's mission and its role in business aviation?
You know, we've been around, as you mentioned, for 54 years. And one of the things I think we are proudest of, Rob and Ian, is that we are a women-owned and operated company. And in fact, the company is right now in its second generation of leadership. And when I was named president in July of last year, the headline was, for the first time, somebody without the Barden last name is the president of API. And so that kind of family history is important. Also, the trailblazing nature of Janice Barden, who was our founder. Ultimately, Rob, what we are after is helping identify top talent for Part 91, primarily flight departments in business aviation. And the way we do that is by getting to truly know our candidates and the talented players in the industry. And as Ian could tell you, we're out at every conference, we're on many different committees, and a large part of that is not only giving back to the community, but identifying those players in the community who might be a great fit for this organization, who might be a great fit for that organization. The other piece that we're really passionate about is helping flight departments ensure that they have a healthy culture. Because we are in the game of hiring and retention, it goes hand in hand, as you both know, with having sound and healthy culture. So that's part of our passion as well.
So organizational health, I know that's a real important thing that you kind of chime on social media here. And obviously all the pieces of the puzzle have to fit together. Talk to us about how important that is and what role you play, or maybe in the organization itself, how important that is for a business to be run successfully.
Oh, yeah. So I will say, just prior to this, I was refreshing myself on some really imperative statistics relative to workplace culture. And one of the ones that always comes back up to my mind is that people are 10 times more likely to leave a job due to culture. We can use the word toxic. I know sometimes that's overused, but let's just say it's an unhealthy culture for you, right? As an employee, they're 10 times more likely to leave because of that than compensation. And so we know that in the business aviation world, compensation really going through the roof, not only for pilots, but now there's maintenance talent shortages and others. So compensation is the talk of the town. And we don't want to forget that organizational culture, healthy culture, is actually what retains people. I often use the analogy, it's like window shopping. You can't not pay competitively. You still have to pay competitively. And you have to pay competitively to get the shopper to stop and look at your window. But once they do, it's the culture, it's what's inside that's going to keep them. Right? So sometimes you see organizations say, well, we have a really healthy culture. We can monetize that. We don't have to pay as competitively. Well, not so much. You can't use it in lieu of, but if you pay enough to get them in the door and then you surround them with a healthy culture, it's going to keep them there. So that's really one of the things that we didn't want to get lost in the shuffle. The other piece is, that we know that healthy cultures also breed success, more productivity. I mean, the list goes on and on. And I know it's a broad statement. Maybe we can dive into it more, but there are telltale signs of healthy and telltale signs of unhealthy.
I'd love to hear more from your perspective. And I know you've got the bird's eye view of when you're working with clients or potential clients, what are you looking for that truly is the earmark of a healthy or an unhealthy organization? And does it start with leadership? Where is it that you look for first to find where these positive or negative attributes are?
So I love that the fact that you said it starts with leadership, because in fact, it absolutely starts with leadership, right? That the leader sets the tone and tenor. And what's interesting about, let's say, take a corporate enterprise, a Part 91 flight department associated with a corporation. You have the macro culture of the enterprise itself, and then you have the microculture of the flight department. And then even within the flight department, you have the microculture of the maintenance team, scheduling and operations teams, so it's really interesting when you dive down in there. When we are doing talent identification projects, the first thing that we do, if I'm going to Robert Hoffman Aviation, the first thing I do is I go out and I visit and I spend an entire day on site with you. And I meet with your individual contributors one-on-one. And I ask them, what do you love about working here? What do you change about? What would you change about working here? And we dig in deep into how they might describe, without asking, how would you describe the culture? We ask questions that will help identify the health or not, or are they satisfied within that group? And so that's part of API's mission when we are conducting a talent project. So we really get to get up close and personal. To answer your question, a lot of it is when we experience healthy cultures, it's almost like you can feel it and taste it. You know, you walk into a hangar, let's say, and it's lighthearted, and there might be some playful banter. You know, the desks have personal photos. You know, there's a cadence, a regularity to them getting together for lunch in the office. You know, there's a real, you can witness the fact that they know each other, that you know that Ian has 2 children, that, you know, that there's just this camaraderie. Now, you can similarly feel it when it's not there, right? The absence of. And maybe that might present like people are a little more quiet in the one-on-one interviews, or they're chomping at the bit to tell you all the ways that they don't feel comfortable, right? And so a lot of that, as we said at the beginning of this question, which is such a good one, is set by the leader of the organization and also the overarching culture of the enterprise. If you have a large bureaucratic organization, chances are the cultures might be slower moving, they might be a little more risk averse, might be more conservative, right? As opposed to other flight departments where it's a quick and agile feeling. It's a curious and learning based culture. So there's all different kinds, and you can flourish in any of them, but you really have to know first what fulfills you as a professional, what kind of environment that you want to be in. And that's, I think, the part that we miss as prospective job hunters. Sometimes we forget to kind of really have a little soul searching about what's a good fit for me and what's not.
Yeah, what I find interesting here is your bespoke approach to your clients. I didn't realize that's a normal thing for an agency to come in and have the access and the ability to speak to the stakeholders beyond the initial phone call and the RFP and, all right, fine, we need help. You can provide the help. Go. Is this a normal thing within business aviation, or is this an API thing that you have the ability or the credibility to walk in the door and really kind of look at the business underneath the magnifying glass?
I would say it's atypical. The reason that it's always worked well for us is because, I mean, let's be real, we're matchmakers, right? And you can't simply, I don't want this to come off wrong, but you have to hear it from the people who are working the jobs. You can't just rely on management's perspective of what the culture is like. And I say that with great respect for management as well. What I mean is sometimes even as managers, we lose touch with how the culture is being lived at the organization. So let me think of an example. We went into a flight department and the director of aviation said to me, we're really highly standardized, very highly standardized. Obviously, that's a great thing. We start talking to the individual contributors one-on-one, and they say, well, we're standardized in that if I fly with Rob, he flies a standard way. If I fly with Ian, he flies a standard way.
It's not really standard, is it?
But I don't think the director of aviation was trying to steer us wrong. I think in this case, happened to be a gentleman. I think he just wasn't totally in touch with how the rubber hits the road. How does it actually land? How does it actually happen on a day-to-day basis? So we realize the importance of, if I'm going to identify somebody who's a true complement for your culture, I have to really understand your culture. And the only way to do that is for you to allow us access. Thankfully, all of the clients that we work with are fantastic in that they do allow us that access. And it's not lost on us that it might be a little uncomfortable for everybody to be talking one-on-one with a recruiter, no less. Obviously, we're not there to poach talent, but that's not lost on us, that does require, to your point, Rob, a lot of trust. Now, at the end of that meeting or that day that we spend on site, I might give you some feedback, some high-level observations, but I'm not there to evaluate your culture. So unless you ask me, is this healthy? Is it not? We're not going to go into any kind of diatribe, right? But I have several clients, I see one of 3 things. They'll say either, give it to us straight, API, or how we doing? Give it to us right between the eyes. Then we have another group that'll say, tell us what you think. And we tell them and they say, noted.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have another group who says, tell us what we think, and we tell them, and then there's full denial. So you just have to ask yourself, what type of organization are we? Are we wanting the feedback? Are we portraying an image that is maybe not being lived day to day. So those are the things it really takes, just like our own personal self-reflections. An organization has to truly reflect on who they are and be honest about it.
It's the irony in recruiting and, in executive search is obviously the more dysfunctional or toxic an environment is, the more turnover there is and the more they need you. But when you're doing your recruiting as well and you want to be transparent, say, hey, listen, this is a really challenging place. They may be offering a lot of money, but there's a reason for it. It's interesting to see here. I know in the end, from my former experience as a recruiter, while yes, it's nice to get a lot of business from a client, I actually way preferred recruiting for a role where I'm like, I wish I could have this role.
Yes.
This is a place you want to work.
Yes.
And when you're transparent like that with your candidates, they can feel it and smell it as well. And I think it's just that flywheel there. It just really helps things a lot, and especially since you're capable of identifying that from a mile away.
Yes. And if I may, it's equally as important that we get to know the candidates in an authentic way. And the way we do that is when candidates come to us, we get to know them without any job on the line. It's independent of any opportunity. And I'm going to give you a really great example of the importance of this. So I got to know this candidate, and what we do is we have a lengthy vetting process. You have to write an autobiography. You have to do psychological assessments. It's a significant investment of your time. Now, no money ever exchanges hands between candidates and API. We do not guarantee placement, but essentially we say, if you're willing to let us get to know you, we might reach out to you with a really fantastic 91 opportunity, because everything we do is under the radar. Our clients are not typically advertising unless they have to for compliance reasons. Otherwise, we're reaching out to our database without the other world, if you will, knowing that that opportunity exists. So I often say we're kind of like an extra set of eyes and ears for you in that 91 community. So let's say Ian comes to us and registers, and we get to know him, and he goes through all this process. Well, then when we go to Rob Hoffman Aviation, and we identify all of these cultural aspects that are very similar to what Ian has described as his ideal placement, that's when we start making those matches. Now, this one time I was speaking to a candidate, and through our process, we were asking about ancillary duties. How do you feel about ancillary duties? He says, I'm more of a show up and fly kind of pilot. That's really not my thing, which is perfectly fine. That's okay. We don't have any judgment around, as our founder, Janice, says, every pot has a lid. So that's okay. We ask them to be honest. Point is, 6 months later, he finds out that we're working with this particular client, word gets out through the grapevine, and he calls and says, Jennifer, I've always wanted to work there. It's my aspirational flight department. And I said, well, I should let you know that part of their culture, sometimes the pilots think they fly a desk. There's a lot of administrative responsibilities, a lot of ancillary duties. And he says, I'm all about side duties. I'm all about ancillary duties. As I'm looking at the notes in our system, right? So I often say hiring managers are at a disadvantage because the person on the other side of the desk wants the job, right? So my advice to people listening to this who are in a hiring manager capacity is you have to always be recruiting, and you should always be recruiting independent of any opportunities that you're offering, so that you really get to know the authentic Ian or the authentic Rob. And you might say to yourself, wow, next time when we're hiring, one of them might be a great fit, as opposed to, hey, Rob, are you interested in working at such and such? You see the difference, so it makes a big difference.
So on that note, what are some of the top recruiting mistakes that you see your clients typically make, or maybe some of your fellow recruiters?
I would say, first and foremost, it's not truly understanding the needs of your organization and the culture of your organization. I'll give you another example. A flight department, like I was describing earlier, that tends to be more conservative and risk averse. They had a pilot that I had met through our kind of one-on-one conversation, and he was saying to me, oh, I'm so frustrated with my manager. They never take my ideas. Everything happens here so slow. And that was really causing him resentment towards his employer. And I had to sit back and say to him, your manager is doing exactly what they're supposed to do. It's the culture. We have a misalignment here. This person happened to be creative and energetic and wanted to make change. And he just happened to not be in a culture that was a good fit for him. So really neither party was at fault. What happened was we were not involved in that hire, obviously, right? So I think sometimes the hiring process itself is limiting. Because how are you as the candidate supposed to truly understand the culture? And how am I, as a prospective employer, to really impart to you what that culture is? So that's one of the first mistakes I see, is people take that way too lightly. Who are we? Who are you? are we a match? And in aviation, when there's a talent shortage, we get really preoccupied about the tactical. Well, we need somebody to fly our G550. We need somebody to work on our aircraft who has Bombardier experience. Do you really? Or do you need somebody who is a complement for your culture, who's going to flourish there and you're going to retain them? So I would say that's one of the first mistakes. The other thing I see sometimes is kind of this posturing of employers where they don't woo a candidate. Your hiring process is a direct reflection on the professionalism of your organization. So if Ian is applying for a job and not hearing back, and I know that happens a lot, right? And I feel it's so hard when you're out there looking for work because that happens a ton. And I know a lot of times it happens because, a job advertisement gets picked up by other search engines. And so even when that's gone, it's still out there and people are applying and they're wondering, what's wrong with me? Why didn't I get a call back? But my point is, as you're going through that process, let's say Ian progresses more and more. There has to be follow through. There has to be consistency. There has to be acknowledgement of Ian's time as a potential candidate. And I see a lot of departments just fall short of that, as if Ian would be lucky to work here.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the attitude. You can't have that attitude anymore. And I'm not saying candidates have all the power, but we've definitely seen a paradigm shift here, right? So I think hiring managers and companies that are looking for talent have to really get right with who are we, who's a good match for us, and let's go out and woo them. Let's go out and find them. And then treat the people who are not a match with respect. Follow through.
And let's just flip this real quick. Any advice you have for job seekers on the opposite end of the spectrum here that are finding it challenging to break in the business aviation or basically get ahead?
Yes. And I, like I said a second ago, I really feel for people in that position. 'Cause the irony is, even though there are talent shortages, there are still people out there having a heck of a time finding a job, and a lot of it does, unfortunately, I think business aviation has earned a bit of a reputation that it's who you know. It is a small, industry, and it's an industry that has some cloak and dagger, right? Not everybody is advertising they have a flight department. So if Ian wants to learn about the culture of a flight department, how is he going to do that if at the all hands meeting at the corporation, they're not even acknowledging that they have a flight department? So it's hard. It's hard to find out what the culture and what it's like to work there. So I often suggest, and I know this is cliche, but networking really is the name of the game. And what I mean by that is I've often said to people, if you want to know what it's like to work at a certain flight department, you can put in pilot at X flight department on LinkedIn. It'll pull up a list of all the people who are registered who have worked there in the past, and send that person a direct message and say, I'm really curious about your flight department. Would you be willing to spend 20 minutes on the phone with me just to learn a little bit more about who you are? Every time you do something like that, your name is going to stick in that person's mind. It's a little bit of a door opening, right? So now when Ian comes back a year from now, he's able to say, I did some research. I chatted with Rob at your organization. It shows that you've put some time and effort into knowing who they are. The other thing I think is, make sure that you are, unfortunately, running your resume through things like applicant trackage systems, to make sure a lot of departments have those now, especially the large corporate enterprises. So you have to have keywords that are in the job description that are in your resume. There's some tips and tricks like that for sure. LinkedIn, your profile. The other day, a candidate came to us and I went and looked at his profile and he was standing there with a big fish for LinkedIn. No.
Don't use that Facebook profile pic in LinkedIn. Yeah.
Yes.
There's a difference.
Yes, there is a difference. The other thing, this may be a little controversial, but, as you probably know, Rob, with the age of social media, part of our process is we go and we look at everybody's everything. And I often explain to candidates that I don't care what side you're on. I don't want to see an overt, aggressive presence. That's going to scare me. And it's especially going to scare me if I'm flying for a high net worth individual who is really private, right? I want to find people who have couth, who have professionalism, who know the boundaries. And so anytime we see anything like that, this side or that side, it's a red flag. And then one more just quick thing that we come across sometimes is somebody will have their resume and then we'll cross-check it against their work history on their LinkedIn, and it doesn't match. So you have to make sure that all the dates match, that all, because again, unfortunately, especially somebody, not necessarily like API, but if somebody's looking at 100 resumes a day, you can guarantee that's going to cut you right out of the mix. You're not going to get a chance to explain that. So attention to detail, right? And doing the research.
That's great. And, we touch on the political spectrum here, and this is something else that I want to bring into the conversation because I do feel it's a hot button topic right now, and that's DEI. Where are we right now with business aviation and DEI? Obviously, HR trends for the last 5 to 10 years have been full speed ahead with making that a top priority in recruiting. But here we are right now, and obviously the political climate has changed. What's your take right now on the importance and the direction of DEI in business aviation today?
It's a big question. So I was actually the chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Group for NBAA, for the committee, for the last 2+ years. And so, this is a question that hits close to home. And I've been asking myself this question a lot, right, in the current landscape. And I would say this, that in my opinion, diversity, let's take away the race, the gender, the orientation piece for a second. There is a reason that we are told to diversify our financial portfolios. Diversity, in its truest meaning, before it has, become so politicized, helps you capitalize and capture on the highest amount of opportunities. I'll give you an example. We worked with a flight department who came to us. They had only ever hired 89th Air Wing. They'd only hired the best of the best pilots, and they all were cut from the same cloth, and they were all from the same branch of the military. Okay. So they called me up about 2 years ago and said, Jennifer, we're ready for diversity. And I'm like, oh, well, what does that mean? We're ready for a civilian pilot. Okay. So that is okay. The fact that they were recognizing that homogeny is not a good thing, right? We don't want everybody talking the same way. We don't want everybody that's gone to the University of Nebraska. We don't want everybody that you have to have diverse people to have diverse outcomes. And if it makes people uncomfortable to think of the race and all of that, think about it as background, right? So maybe you bring somebody in the mix who, a maintenance professional who's worked at MROs, and then you have a maintenance professional who's worked only in corporate aviation. Put those two together, imagine what they can come up with, right? They both have different experiences, different ideas. So my hope is that if we have to take the focus off DE&I, and I understand, and I'll just keep many comments to myself about that, right? But I would hope that the industry would still value diversity. Remember that hiring somebody with a diverse background does not mean they're less qualified. Right? Somehow those became conflated, that somehow we're superseding qualifications to put somebody in there of a certain background, right? When really what it was about was trying to look at the pool you're choosing from, right? So, if you're choosing from only one demographic, are you getting the best talent? I would suggest perhaps you're not, right? You have to choose from a pool of multiple backgrounds to really see if you're getting the best talent. And what I mean by that is the most complementary to your culture, someone that's going to thrive, and the person that brings the tactical and the strategic vision and skills to really help complement your organization.
And what I applaud you for bringing up is that diversity, you've broadened the definition of what I think has historically been the parameters that many hiring departments have been using for diversity. And I think you're onto something here, and hopefully, the industry is listening, that maybe DEI doesn't need to be, the baby doesn't be thrown with the bathwater, but maybe a new definition of what DEI really means or the way it's applied right now can still be helpful. At the same time, cease to be the lightning rod that, in my opinion, it's well deserved right now, because I do believe that HR has gone a little too far with some of the DEI practices from my personal vantage point from when I was in hiring. But it's very interesting, your take on things, and I think it's to be applauded. Yeah. Ian, I'm going to pass the buck on to you right now. I know you've got a few questions.
Yeah, no. Jennifer, looking at current trends in business aviation, wanted to kind of touch a few things here. We already mentioned the pilot shortage, some retention challenges. I'm just going to kind of fire off a few things all at once here and let you run with it. But what are you seeing as the most in-demand roles currently? And why is it tough to keep top talent maybe in those positions or in those roles?
Great question, Ian. And you're right. It's the top of everybody's mind for sure. So there's definitely still a pilot shortage and there's a maintenance shortage. And true to our industry, which is always pilot centric, everybody talks about the pilot shortage and very less spoken about is the maintenance shortage. So I'm glad that, we'll make sure that we touch on both of those. Relative to, I do think that when pilot compensation really started to take off, was that 3-4 years ago, if you will? Forgive the pun. There was a lot of professionals who were out there doing a cash grab, right? So I'm going to leave this employer because this one's paying 50 grand more. I'm going to do this because this one's, offering 25 grand more and I get to move to the state I want to live in, whatever. I do think that some of that has slowed down. I think that a lot of professionals who were tempted by the bright, shiny object or went for the bright, shiny object, understandably so, no judgment around that. I had a candidate say to me, Jennifer, I feel like I owe it to my family to go do this. Well, a lot of those outcomes weren't what people expected. And a lot of times we find that something with a very, very high paying paycheck has a downside to it, right? So did they get to that organization or high net worth individual, whatever the case, and find that the quality of life was terrible or find that the culture was toxic? So I feel, and we were just having a conversation at API about this. We feel like those job seekers are a little more informed these days and not quite as ready to just leap, not after the paycheck. I think people are slowing down and thinking about it a little more. Now, on the piece of how do you keep them, one thing that's really tough is that if you have a corporate enterprise in particularly, I'll use that as an example, because as you know, Rob, there's salary bands in corporate enterprises. It's difficult. So when a segment of the market takes off exponentially, a lot of organizations can't keep pace. They cannot keep pace with the way the compensation is going. So what happens is that they start falling behind, and then maybe they lose a pilot in this scenario, and they go to hire, and they realize they have to pay much, much more than they're paying the talent that they already have. And so it creates these internal equity issues. And that is a real predicament. It's a real predicament. And one of the things as I was preparing for this podcast, I was thinking about as a perfect example of this. This is where leaders have to have managerial courage. This is where either an organization makes an adjustment to everybody and brings them all up to an equal playing field, or they bring in the other pilot at 25 grand more and they don't make adjustments to the rest. Maybe there's reasons for that, but you have to talk through it with your team. You can't let those things happen in a vacuum. And this is where we talk about hard conversations. I get it. It's a hard conversation. But I guarantee if you ignore it, you're going to have much more attrition than if you name it and you explain why. And maybe we have to stair step. Maybe over the next 3 years, we can get you where this person is. And we have to explain if we're going to get the top talent, we have to pay top dollar. And we acknowledge we've fallen behind. And this is why we've fallen. You get the idea, right? Have to have a dialogue about it. And there's a lot of times I meet with leaders who are fighting tooth and nail with the corporation, with their compensation teams, their HR teams. And meanwhile, the individual contributors don't even know that. So I show up on the scene, they're like, nobody fights for us. We don't have an advocate. Well, I know very well that Ian has been beating the drum, right? But for some reason, Ian isn't telling his people that. So I recognize as a leader, you can't be totally transparent, but you can push yourself. Like, you're talking to professionals, you're talking to adults, right? I mean, let's have the respect to have the conversation and reveal what you can, but do it in a way that allows for dialogue, for question and answer. So that's one piece. On the maintenance side, I would say we have such a pipeline issue there, right? We just don't have, as we know, as many people going into the trades. I think that is improving a little bit, and I think my prediction is with the cost of college, with advanced education going through the roof, I think we're going to see a lot more people turning to the trades, right? Because fact is, you could go to A&P school and maybe at your first job come out and be making 60 to 85, somewhere in there. I don't know about you two. At my first job paid me $26,000. Like, and I had to
Same.
go, Same. So, and I want to just share something with you and your followership here that as people in the professional community, make sure when you're talking to young people, like I had a daughter who graduated high school 2 years ago. And when we went on the whole graduation party tour, you've all been there if you've had kids of that age, I made sure to say, what are your plans after high school? Instead of saying, where are you going to college? We have to be conscious of this stigma that exists, and help thwart that. Because the fact is, we both know, all of us know, that they are professionals like any other professional, So that's part of it too, is kind of helping elevate those people, make them aware of opportunities that are afforded to them that might not involve a 4-year degree. Even I'll tell you, I've seen a change. We have clients who forever have required college degrees when they're hiring captains. They let that go, And that, by the way, is really wise. It's really wise that's another kind of telltale. If you haven't any time recently review your hiring requirements, now's the time to do it. Because it's things like that. And that took us saying, do you still need to require a college degree? Well, I don't know. I guess we just always have, So even distance.
So many job descriptions are just copy and paste, and they've been doing it for years, and no one's even reading what's in there anymore. And yeah, it's great to have a fresh take and review these things and say, do you really need these requirements?
Yeah, it's not just an automatic denial letter sent out just because they didn't check that box that said they have a 4-year or 6 or 7 or whatever degree in, you name it.
Yes.
So that's good.
Looking at, obviously, we're talking a lot about business aviation right now. I'm just curious, you don't really work in the commercial aviation vertical, do you? Do you know if there's vast differences? And even from the recruiting perspective, as far as personnel, is business aviation equipped to basically go toe-to-toe with commercial aviation, with the MROs and all the big airlines out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our friend and partner, Dr. Chris Broyhill, was just speaking about that, and he kind of made the analogy of we're in the eye of the hurricane, as far as the talent shortage and such. It feels calm right now, and his point was that we're going to see a resurgence of commercial aviation. The relationship we've often had with commercial aviation is that when they need pilots, they come to poach ours, right? And so, as you know, and I think that's probably the implication of your question is, so United Airlines just placed the largest order ever for 787s. So we know that we're going to see this come back. Now, the good thing is that in many ways, I think it was a good thing, because when this started to happen 3-4 years ago, corporate aviation or business aviation really started to step up. They realized, our pilots are being poached. It used to be, prior to that you'd have pilots being poached by one corporate enterprise from another, going from, for lack of a better example, Nationwide to Geico, that's where you would see pilots and talent moving. But then with that rise in commercial demand, we saw a lot of people going to commercial. So we saw business aviation really step up in that they really try to start to get a handle on what should we be paying and how can we compete. And we can't always compete. There are some airlines that are offering, 16% of salary being put directly into 401k and things like that we can't always necessarily compete with. But we became much more competitive and started instituting things like hard days off, and maybe looking at our distance to principal. Maybe we've always wanted our pilots and our maintenance professionals and everybody within a 60-mile radius. Maybe we open that aperture a little bit, let it go a little further. I still haven't seen a ton of traditional Part 91s make commuting available. Some of them have, but it's difficult with an on-demand need. Yeah. It's hard to do that. So I would say the other interesting thing is, Rob, that at API, when they were doing furloughs at the airlines, we had all these pilots registering with us, all these commercial pilots. Generalizing, I own that, but a lot of them had the attitude that, well, if I can fly, a big old 787, whatever, then surely I can come over to business aviation and fly a G650. And so there's also this false impression, right, that they're the same type of service delivery, which of course we all know they're not. You have business aviation where it's highly personalized. You're flying with the same crews, you're flying the same executives, of course, versus commercial where you're walking down the jetway and turning left. So there's a lot of things that are dissimilar. On our client side, it was interesting because during that time, I had clients who would say to me, we're not going to look at anybody commercial, so don't even try. But if they had business aviation in their history, if they had ever worked in business aviation before, then that sometimes would open a window, right? Because they knew that this pilot or maintenance professional may actually know a little bit about the culture of this industry. So those are just some of the high level aspects of the relationship, Rob. But I think more than anything, it's had a positive impact. There's definitely a sweet spot, a certain age range, where if pilots go with that age range to commercial, then they could potentially make, right, based on that trajectory, One thing we could improve on business aviation is transparency. That's one area where commercial aviation kind of beats us in that I could show you a spreadsheet in commercial aviation. If you're this old, what you're going to be making when you're 60. And
Yeah, it's unionized and it's pretty much set in stone. They've been following this path for a long time. Obviously, it's been modified, but yeah, you know what you're going to get. You're working with really big, multi-billion-dollar companies. You know, some of these airlines here are massive employers, and I think their HR strategy, it's all kind of set in stone and once again, pretty transparent. You know what you're going to get.
exactly.
Or I imagine you had mentioned Cloak and Dagger a little earlier. I guess with a lot of these smaller, they're going to be a lot more opaque with their
But
processes.
we could be more transparent. Like if a pilot goes in as an FO, instead of having the move to captain being subjective and guarded, and how about we put down on paper, what your requirements are going to be. Now, I've had directors of aviation say to me, Jennifer, we just still want to have a little subjectivity, right? Because maybe they've hit all those things, but they're still not ready. That's okay. But showing somebody on paper or walking them through what their career trajectory is going to be like is very, very important. And another way that I see this twisted in a negative way is with the generational piece. I had a director of aviation say to me, this young man came in and wanted to upgrade to captain and had all these expectations, talk about a sense of entitlement. When I went and talked to the candidate, he said, Jennifer, I just wanted to know what my path was going to be. I just wanted some level of transparency. I don't expect that I'm going to get there faster than anybody else, but can you show me what steps I'm going to have to take? So sometimes those things can be, unfortunately, relegated to a certain attitude or a certain, when in fact, we all want transparency, right? Let's be real. So
It's definitely the name of the game these days. Jennifer, there was so much valuable intel that you shared with us today. And I, for one, feel like I learned a lot in this past half hour. It's really interesting to see here how you kind of shed a light on a different side of business aviation, that you're lifting up the veil and letting our listeners at home kind of see how things are really done there. And hopefully there's some takeaway that they can follow here to help them with their journey. So on that note, how can they find you online and how can they get in touch with API?
yeah, absolutely. So I am on LinkedIn, Jennifer Pickerel, of course. All of my colleagues on our team, we are all on LinkedIn. Aviation Personnel International has an Instagram page, a LinkedIn page. We have a Facebook page. And then just go to our website, apiaviation.com. You can learn all about us, get all of our contact details. Please, what I guess I want to say is, all are welcome in that, we don't discriminate about who we bring into our system. And we're trying hard to also make space for the younger talent out there, right? We stay partnered with our candidates through the duration of their career. We're not transactional. So recently, we've really been trying to bring more younger people into the fold and kind of help them along there. Now, does that mean we're getting them jobs? If we can, great. But more than anything, we're a great resource. As Ian can tell you, we have the HR piece. We have knowledge about what works and what doesn't, what might put you in a position as more competitive than not, what kind of time you might want to go get if you're on the pilot side. So don't be shy about, I only have 300 hours and I don't, or I just got my A&P and I'm not sure. We really wanted to get out there that we welcome everybody.
Yeah, we love that. And I think that's fantastic, keeping tabs on everybody as they grow up within business aviation. So appreciate all of that info.
Jennifer, thank you so much for being on the show. It was lovely having you over here. I want to thank the listeners at home as well. A reminder to everyone to follow us on LinkedIn, like and subscribe to the podcast, and be sure to share with your friends and colleagues. Your review or feedback is greatly appreciated and helps us spread the word. Up on our next show, are we going to get Joe Peebles in next week, Ian? I don't know. We keep teasing this.
Joe's an elusive bugger. Eventually, sometime here in the next few weeks, we will see Joe. I know we've got a lot of other really good and exciting people queued up as well. So looking forward to that.
All right, everyone. So stay tuned. Sooner or later, we're going to definitely get Joe on the show. If there are any other subjects you'd like us to cover, just leave it in the comments below. Thank you all, and see you all next week with a new episode of The Crosscheck.